because I think that they say that without thinking through, do they mean the 40 and 50-year-old? Do they mean the 20 and 25-year-old, et cetera?
And what's their answer?
Well, often they haven't thought it through that much. They just mean younger than what they're seeing in the hall. And frankly, to be honest with you, I try to focus them on the 35 to 50-year-old range, thinking there's more hope there. When you're 24 or 28 or 32 years old, you're raising kids, you're at the early stage of your career, you're putting money aside for college for your kids. It's harder. It's harder to find the time. It's only as you move on in life. And also, I think tastes tend to change. And one of the things I've started to talk about, I mean, it's very interesting, because what happens sometimes, Greg, is I learned something that worked at one orchestra that nobody knows about because they did it quietly and it worked for them. So about 3 years ago, I learned about Duluth's 50% off price introductory offer for new subscribers. The board in Duluth resisted at first the manager's suggestion to do this because they thought it would get the old subscribers mad. He convinced them that he would answer any complaint they got. It didn't get very many complaints, and it worked. And the shocking thing was that after the new subscribers were finished with their first year and were offered a chance to renew, their ticket price, of course, doubled. We know in the field that the national average for first-year subscribers renewing is about 46 or 47%. Well, 41% of the Duluth first-year subscribers renewed, even though the ticket price doubled, which said once they came in, they liked what they heard.
And there are a lot of success stories to parallel this. One from St. Paul is reaching through neighborhood concerts a new audience. They decided to try to sell them subscriptions. Yeah. They reduced the price, but they asked people to consider donating the difference between the regular price and the reduction, and people did. Yeah. But now, what you just said brings up many questions. One of them, which maybe we don't want to get in here, is that I think your 35 to 50s are a less lost cause than your under 35s, because the under 35s have grown up in a completely different culture. And what orchestras do and what classical music does and what the concert environment is may be very, very, very foreign to them, but less so as you get older. But that's a huge question.
Well, it is a huge question, and while I don't have the answer at all, I think it's a really important area of study, and I think one of the things the League is starting to do that we have not done in the past is make connections with people who study that very question. Vanderbilt University Kerb Center for Cultural Policy and other university and other study centers that examine how the coming generations absorb culture, consume culture. And I'm hoping that that will begin to provide some directional suggestions.
Yes, it's actually such a well-known study. There are so many books on current culture. One of the most famous is No Brow.
Yeah.
And I have just started rereading this, and it's amazing how many comments in it there are about classical music, all kind of giving it the back of its hand. Yeah. Like, why would anybody care about that? But that's a big question, which I personally think orchestras are backward about and need to learn about fast. But
I agree.
Let me come to something that's simpler, but in its way equally devastating. I really believe, number one, that there is no repository, nothing even close, of information on what the hundreds of American orchestras have done. What initiatives they've tried, what success they've had, what failures they've had. The only way I've ever been able to gather this myself is through word of mouth.
It is my hope that if you and I are sitting here in a couple of years, you will not be able to say that.
Right, because this is information gathering is now going to be a big priority.
Yeah, I mean, the League has established a new department with a vice president level senior executive of research and development precisely because we agree with your statement.
Yeah,
and we believe that we are the only place that makes sense for there to be such a repository.
Absolutely.
Now, we have started a little bit. There is an innovations forum on our website. which starts to at least explain, for example, the Duluth ticket thing, but other ideas that you can go to and see, and you can learn who to contact for more information. There's going to be a whole part of our conference coming up in Nashville in June about that's going to have examples with orchestras, staffs present. So, for example, the Chicago Symphony's Beyond the Score series, they're going to be there, and you'll be able to sit down with them and talk to them about what worked, what didn't work, why did it seem to work, which it does seem to be working, what did they do, what are the traps and pitfalls. And there are going to be, I think 15 or so orchestras. Each have their own table, and people will get 15 minutes or however long they need and then move to another one. So we're starting to do that now, but I hope in a couple of years we'll have a much more complete repository.
Right, and everybody should understand that I'm not blaming or criticizing the League. This is a new frontier.
Yeah.
So my next question following up from this is, it strikes me that among the smaller orchestras, they may not know what their peers in other cities are doing.
Well, again, that's our job.
Yes.
That's our job. And I think we're much better at it now than we were 2 years ago, and I hope in another 2 years we'll be even better. Just the fact we have roughly 400 professional members. I've visited 108 of them. That's a quarter of them. And I talk about what I'm seeing as a success elsewhere. I mean, after I learned of the Duluth new subscription offer, and that's just one example of something that worked, I think there are 8 or 10 other orchestras that, because I visited there, have done exactly the same thing. I'm doing, another example of that is I'm doing, in fact, I do it this afternoon, a mentoring circle. I have 2 of them, which are 6 brand new first-year board chairs of small orchestras that spend 90 minutes once a month on the phone with me. And they pick the topics they're interested in. And it was very interesting because at the last one of these, one orchestra said, you know, we've changed the format of our board meetings. Board meetings used to talk about, every board meeting talked about every problem. And we've found that each problem got 8 minutes of discussion, no depth, and we've moved to one big topic, one issue for the board to wrestle with. And one of the other board chairs said, oh, Henry must have visited your orchestra too.
And did you?
And it was true. And I had visited both of them and made that suggestion. So part of getting the word out is something that I try to do in the visits. But again, the conference, the website, which we're completely redesigning, Symphony Magazine, the mission, one of the prime parts of the mission of the League is to be the disseminator of good practices.
All of that is very important. And I'm thinking also of something that's so simple. It strikes me, and maybe I'm wrong about this because I don't visit many of these orchestras, but if you're talking about an orchestra the size of Duluth or South Dakota, most of the people involved in that orchestra don't, for example, have a standard by which to judge how well they play because they haven't heard other orchestras of their budget level, of their size. Just for example.
That's correct. That's correct. You know that you aren't likely in an orchestra with a budget of $1 million and 6 or 7 concerts a year. You're not likely to have the Cleveland Orchestra or the Berlin Philharmonic. What should you expect? What do you have the right to expect? And it varies, Greg, enormously. You have some executive directors and some music directors who get around. You occasionally have some board people who get around. On the other hand, you have some who don't. And I have seen some very sad situations, which will remain nameless, where a music director has been allowed to stay far too long. The orchestra has long outgrown that music director, and no change is made in part because the board doesn't realize it could be better. Now, what's interesting there is I'll tell you who does know, always. the musicians. Because in most of those places, no musician is making a full-time living playing